Well, good evening, Viva Albertos. It is Wednesday night. The Cardinals have made several large moves over the last few days. We're here to start talking about two of them. Started on Friday with a non-tender deadline. We found out that Andrew Kisner and Jake Woodbrick. What the world is a Woodbrick? Jake Woodford. That's my way of saying, I used to say, as a lot of you guys know, Jake Westbrook on the side. I finally corrected that, but now apparently I still can't say Jake Woodford. But Andrew Kisner, Jake Woodford, and Dakota Hudson are gone, along with Juan Yepez. And then turned around right after Aaron Nola signed back with the Phillies and brought in their version of that move, which was Lance Lynn on Monday. And if you didn't see the news yet, Kyle Gibson here on Tuesday. We are recording Tuesday evening. This will publish Wednesday morning, just in time for your Thanksgiving holiday travels, so you can listen to us rant and rave, and probably by the end come out feeling good, because we always want to leave you with some optimism, especially on a holiday. With that, I bring on our most optimistic member. That is Blake Newberry. How's it going, Blake?
It's going well. It's nice, kind of, to have some baseball news back in my life. So at least there's that.
We do have news. I mean, that I'll give the Cardinals that. They gave us something to talk about around the Thanksgiving tables, except for politics. So you got big plans for this Thursday, Blake?
Not a whole lot. Gonna bounce between my parents and then my wife's parents for the 2 days. So it'll be busy, but it'll be fun.
Yeah. And then back with us after a case of the general manager meeting flu. I don't know if that's the case or not, but back with us is Adam Akbani. How's it going, Adam?
I'm doing well, man. I'm just kind of excited now to see if you guys have mentioned, just to look over these new moves, talk about what's going on with them, and see use for the future, and hopefully they continue to make signings.
Yeah. Now, Adam, you, if I'm correct, you have graduated from WashU. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. We toured WashU a couple weeks ago. Incredible campus, incredible teachers, incredible dorms. Did you live in the dorms all 4 years? And if you didn't, why the heck not, man? Those are amazing.
Well, so the first 2 years I did,
Yeah.
and then they said for junior year they're reserving all the dorms for the undergraduates for COVID because they had to space everyone out.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I mean, I had an apartment with my friends anyway, and then I stayed with them senior year too. So yeah, so off campus last couple of years, first 2 years, it's kind of good to stay on campus though, for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's a great place, WashU. Was really impressed with it. So that's not baseball talk, though. Let's forget about that. Let's jump into the moves that have happened over the last few days. Starting with, let's see, are we feeling optimistic or are we feeling pessimistic? Are we feeling Kyle Gibson or are we feeling Lance Lynn? We'll probably end up talking about both, but we'll go with the first signing, and that is Lance Lynn. Now, Blake, you wrote about him on the site. I think just this morning it published. And so tell me, what should I like about Lance Lynn returning to the Cardinals?
I mean, he was not my preferred signing, but I will say he gave up home runs at basically a batting practice rate last year, or I guess this year. And I don't think that that's likely to continue, if only for the fact that it's such an extremely high, almost outlier home run rate that he gave up, that it's kind of hard to believe that he can even match that again. I mean, on my article this morning, I kind of totaled the last 25 instances of a pitcher giving up a home run on like that high of a rate of his fly balls. The home run per fly ball rate dropped like 5% the next year. So granted, it's not exactly one-to-one comparison, but you're looking at pitchers who were 28, 32, et cetera, and Lance Lynn's going to be 37 and has already seen his velocity decline. So it's not necessarily guaranteed that it's going to drop, but I just find it hard to believe that he's going to give up as many home runs again next year as he did this past year. And I do think there's some arsenal tweaks he can make too to kind of help with that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the home runs for a second. We've got huge news. We don't have a ton of content to race through tonight, so we can live on Lance Lynn and live on Kyle Gibson for a while. So his home run per fly ball rate was high, 19%. I mean, I think that is an unusually high rate. I will say, though, that it has been climbing. 2019 home run per fly ball rate of 9.9. 2020, now that's a short year, COVID year, 13.8. The next year, 10.2, 14.0, 19.0. That is a trend with an outlier at the end of it when the pitcher is also at his oldest age. And if we know anything about pitcher aging curves, what we know is that Ks and velocity start dipping like this, especially for starters, and home runs and walks start going like this. And 19% I would agree is high, but at the same time, why should we expect anything like, the 10% or the 9% that we saw 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard. Like it's easy to see the trend there, and that's why I'm not entirely confident that Lynn's strikeout or home run rate is even gonna come down. Like ideally it would, and I mean, mathematically speaking, with zero context, you would think it would, but it's not guaranteed. And I will say I do think a lot of that's going to come down to command for Lynn, because as his velocity has declined, it's become a lot more susceptible to just getting crushed. So when he leaves his fastballs inside or over the middle of the plate, they just get obliterated.
Yeah.
So it's all just going to be, can he live on the outside, and are his mistakes going to get crushed?
Yeah.
And that's really not a great recipe.
So tell me about his arsenal right now, because it seems like in me looking at it, he was almost a one type pitcher, because you kind of have a fastball, a sinker, and a cutter, which are all the same pitch type, and then like what's his occasional curve?
Yeah, he's got a curve in there.
I think it started with a slider. I think it became a curve, later. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at a one type pitcher.
I mean, and that's actually the interesting thing with Lynn is when you look at a pitcher whose fastball velocity is declining and whose fastballs got crushed, he also throws fastballs, or at least fastball variations, about 80% of the time. So it's not really a great combination there, but it's at least important to differentiate between four seamers, sinkers, and cutters, because while they all are fastballs, they all move differently and give the hitter a different look. Okay. So the cutter, at least, which I actually found interesting, has not lost velocity. It's the four seamer and the sinker have. The cutter has just maintained where it's at. So I think that's really going to be the pitch that he needs to use to get inside on hitters. And he's just going to have to hope his fastballs don't get crushed. And then he's got I will say the Dodgers actually, after they traded for him, added a sweeper to his arsenal. He threw it like 10 times.
Yeah,
but
five pitches it shows here. Yeah. Yeah.
I would not be shocked to see him take a little bit of a Kyle Gibson turn and go, because Gibson developed a sweeper actually in 2022, barely threw it, and then threw it a lot in 2023. I don't think necessarily that Lynn's going to throw it a lot, but I wouldn't be shocked if that jumped up to about like 5 or 10% usage, and just kind of gave him something that he could use against right-handed hitters and help just keep them off of the fastball a little bit. So that is something I would look for next year. I mean, beyond that, I would love to see him maybe get away from the fastballs a little bit. I know the Dodgers kind of cut down his cutter usage, and I want to see that return. I think he really is going to have to live on that cutter next year, or it's going to hurt.
Yeah. Adam, jump in here, man. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, no. So, aside from kind of breaking down into his pitching, I do like the fact that, they're addressing the innings aspect. That I know Jeff mentioned that it was an issue where, they had to cover a lot of bodies for the pitching staff, and it needed to acquire major league ready talent, in the sense that, a lot of the guys they have in AAA are almost ready, but maybe not, capable of contributing on opening day in 2024. And I think that is true to a degree, but I did think that, also that if you're a team like the Cardinals and your team, in the mid-high budget range amongst MLB squads, $10 million means a lot. You don't have what is essentially an open checkbook and, an infinite money glitch. If you're Brian Cashman, or if you're the Dodgers, or if you're the Giants or the Red Sox, or maybe even the Cubs. And for me, just to kind of see, spending $10 million on kind of what we talked about internally on a guy who we feel that, whose value can probably be accrued at least from the guys that are internal right now. Even and we talked about it just now, that there is the depth isn't too ready, as for opening day next year, but I still believe that I would take my chances with a guy like Zach Thompson or Matthew Liberatore, or maybe even a couple of other guys who might be ready pretty soon after the season begins next year, instead of spending $10 million, which could have been absolutely spent on a guy like a Yoshinobu Yamamoto, a Blake Snell. Aaron Nola was out of the question before we even got to free agency. Or, other guys are probably in between the Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn tier, and between the Yamamoto and the top tier guys. So to see them kind of spend money on a guy like Lance Lynn when they're not a team that just has infinite budget, they can afford to just spend $10 million on a Lance Lynn just because they can and it's a luxury. I don't think Mozeliak and his squad have the luxury to do that, and I just worry about how this is going to affect their spending for an ace. And now with Kyle Gibson, it almost kind of makes it worse in the sense that now they only have maybe 25 to 30 million. Which, I mean, if they go for that ace, they still got some holes in the bullpen. One could argue, and it wouldn't hurt signing a couple of depth relievers, and it's going to cost more than what they have. So
Yeah.
I mean, you could always see an increase in the budget. That's totally possible. Maybe DeWitt approves of it going just a bit over for the sake of having to contend and to allay the pitching concerns. But I just still think that it's going to be a little bit tough to see. I mean, maybe they still target that ace, but fingers crossed that this is obviously they said it's not the final move, but maybe hopefully the final move is what we're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get into some more of that. I think there's a lot of conversation there that I want to have about budgeting and about what they're going to do next. And I think Mozeliak's comments were really interesting today at the press conference. I caught most of it in bits and pieces, and it took me a while to kind of get it to load. It wasn't loading right, which is a little annoying, but so I kind of wonder what I missed in the middle. But he kind of kept implying and kept saying, the offseason, long offseason, long offseason, long offseason. It's like, well, yeah, but you've already made 2 starting moves, so you're shortening it on purpose, my friend. So we'll get to that. But I was thinking about something you said there, Adam, and I kind of wanted to ask you guys and react to it. Like if we say, which people on the side, I know some of you will agree or disagree with that. So set aside this disagreement for a second. If we say that Lance Lynn is replacement level or a little bit better, not a 1.5 to 3 WAR pitcher, that might be fairly fair that a lot of us would agree with. And so we say that Zach Thompson, maybe some of the other guys could duplicate that level of production. I think what we're hearing from Mozeliak today is that while some of those guys, he mentioned Graceffo as an example, not really pointing to Graceffo, but just saying, say if Graceffo were to contend and step forward in spring training, what Graceffo couldn't provide, even if he provided the talent, is the innings. And so here's what I'm wondering from you guys, and this, because it seems like and we're hearing the Cardinals' answer to this, is a replacement or slightly better starter who's guaranteed to give you 175 to 200 innings at a replacement level or just better value. Is that better than 3 guys who will give you a replacement level or a little bit better production over 175 innings? Their answer to that question seems very clear to be yes, this is better. 1 guy at replacement level or a little bit better for 188 innings is significantly better and worth $10 million more than these 3 guys who would do exactly the same thing.
Well, hold on. I want to make sure I understand you a little bit better, because when you say
wait, that 5-minute diatribe, you didn't understand what I just said?
well, just to kind of understand, because when you say a pitcher who is off, when you say a guy who's throwing 180 innings, and when you say at replacement level, that's a 0 WAR pitcher. Yeah. So,
well, I'm just saying, so that's replacement level or better. Let's say we're saying that Lance Lynn is a 0 to 1.5 WAR pitcher next year, and we think that he's going to give us about 180 innings. That's something that, say, Graceffo or Robersi or some of these guys are probably able to duplicate on like a WAR per inning pitch basis. But there's no way that Robersi is going to come in and give you 180 innings. No way Graceffo is going to give you 180 innings. So it would take an aggregate of starters to get close to that production level here, versus it's worth a $10 million investment over here to get the 1 guy who can do it, despite it being the same level of production.
Yeah, and at least for me, I see what you're saying, JP, and honestly, I feel like I would rather just cycle the guys in and see who can step up, because some guy's going to take the role and run with it, whether it's Liberatore, Graceffo down the line, McGreevy, maybe like Tinkens, like I said later, but someone is like Graceffo. Someone's going to take that spot and run with it. Zach Thompson, there's plenty of guys, and I think like they're going to figure that out eventually at some point in the season, and I think you're going to see. Like if they hadn't signed Lynn, I think it would have been perfect. They would have just rolled with that, and they would have seen that cost benefit analysis kind of like play out down the road, where they're saving that 10 million. And who knows if they spent that 10 million now, or if they even have that later fixed into the budget, the deadline where they can go and acquire a win now piece on July 31st, 2024. if they're kind of in that situation come deadline next year. But unfortunately, they didn't, and I just feel like they could have just swiveled guys in and out, and someone would have taken a spot and run with it.
Blake?
So I'll play the devil's advocate on that because I'm actually so I'll start with I probably have Lynn pegged for about 1 to 1.5 WAR this year. And a lot of that's going to be innings driven as we talked about.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the Cardinals have that production in any of their pitchers not named Zach Thompson. I'm pretty sure Zach Thompson could get them there, but having Zach Thompson as your fifth starter and then nobody behind him means that rotation is going to go down in flames pretty quickly. So when I look at guys like Matthew Liberatore or Michael McGreevy or Gordon Graceffo or whatever, Robersa, Kloffenstein, all of them have issues that they need to fix before they're going to be even somewhat reliable MLB starters. I mean, we've talked about the issues that Levy's had for years at the site. Graceffo's got an issue with his fastball shape. McGreevy's stuff just isn't that good. Like every single pitcher is going to have issues there. So I think the value of Lynn is that he adds certainty. It might not be even good certainty, but it adds a level of certainty where he's going to take the ball and he might give up 4 runs every 6 innings. Maybe not great. But when you have a guy like he's going to put you at about 1 to 1.5 WAR. If we think about it like we're cycling through players, let's say we start with Liberator.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at now. Go ahead.
So if Liberator starts 5 games and puts up negative 0.3 WAR, you filter him out. You put in whoever you want next, Graceffo, whatever. Let's say they put up negative 0.3 WAR. By the time it takes you to find somebody, he has to make up ground to even get back into 0 WAR territory. So I'm again playing devil's advocate on something on a move that I'm not even sure I agree with. But I can at least see the sense in that of not wanting to risk it with a bunch of prospects who aren't ready, hoping that you eventually find one that is.
Yeah, like I'm looking at Liberatore. Now, the problem with Liberatore's projections, one is that I'm not a huge fan of Steamer. It's just the Steamer projections is all we have right now. Like if we had Zips out there, I would be way more comfortable talking about it. So disclaimer, I don't really like Steamer. Steamer is what we have. Steamer is what I'm using. So Steamer has Liberator. I'm just going to use some selected stats. I'm not trying to be selective on purpose. It's just because I don't trust all the stats. I'm just choosing here. Steamer has Liberator at 120 innings pitched and a 4.53 ERA for a 1.1 FWAR. That's pretty much what he did last year. 61 innings pitched in the majors, 64 in AAA, so that's 125 total. He could ramp up to 150. 4.28 ERA in MLB level. Now that's only an 11 starts. I just don't know what his FIP was before he moved to the bullpen and how much it would have dropped. But I'm pretty sure that his FIP was lower than his ERA.
Yeah. So I actually have it up here. His FIP was 450, or his FIP was 440 as a starter. His XFIP was 526. So it's not pretty, and a lot of that WAR came from his time in the bullpen.
Yeah. So I just I leave that kind of wondering. It's like, well, I know that Lynn's production on Steamer is going to be higher than that because Steamer is going to factor in his previous history quite a bit, and that's fair. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm personally not a believer that once you get to this age that your previous history at age 33 and 34 should matter that much because you're 37 now. But I bet that Lance Lynn's real production could be in that same range as Liberator. But actually, so is it worth 10 million to have Liberator in the bullpen so that Lynn can start instead? With the collapse value, I don't know. Maybe Liberator and Lynn have the same collapse rate, to be honest. Because what we saw from Liberator so far and what we're expecting from Lynn, neither are that promising.
Just to get in about Liberator, he had 11 starts and his total 0.8 WAR for the season. 0.7 came in from the rotation, actually, not from the bullpen. He had 11 starts and 49 innings, and Fangraphs likes to take advantage of the fact that they weigh heavily that you keep the ball in the ballpark and you don't walk hitters for as few strikeouts as Liberator does get. There is a lot of value in keeping the ball on the ground or at least at a lower launch angle on average. And this came from it was actually from the rotation. So if you give him the time to settle into a game, he gets there, and as he continues to churn through innings, that if you prorate that's just under 150 innings for a guy who's essentially in his rookie season. Obviously, you probably wouldn't be doing that over the course of a full year being a 2 WAR starter, but if Matthew Liberator, if you get instead of 2 WAR, if you get a 1 WAR out of Matthew Liberator as a 6th starter, over the course of 80, 90, 100 innings, presuming that he gets better next year, I think that's a luxury, right? Especially at a cost control. And that's why I'm saying, if you're having a guy like Lance Lynn, who's potentially going to be your fourth or fifth, maybe even sixth guy, which I don't even think they need a fourth or fifth guy for these very reasons. I really do like the fact that Zach Thompson was, he did provide, in 9 starts and 45 innings was, striking out a lot of hitters and did allow some home runs. But at the end of the day, he was almost a one-war pitcher, not even throwing 50 innings. So at worst, you have you have a decent, like high leverage reliever. And I think this is a guy who could probably be a fifth starter in the rotation. If you have a 2-war pitcher as your fifth guy, you're dealing well, assuming that everyone else is better. And that's the problem because, you don't have, you just have a bunch of 2-war guys who are going to be filling the rotation. And at least so far, and not a top end guy. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they attack that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what it boils down to is that Lynn is this club's fifth starter, and that if something goes wrong, they're going to have some level of affinity to him, but we're probably not talking about Wainwright levels of affinity. They're probably not going to live and die by Lance Lynn. And so if Graceffa or Liberatore or Thompson, I think Thompson would be the best candidate if he really shows out in spring, and Lynn is still walking guys and can't keep the ball in the ballpark. There could be a shuffle there, but it's a $10 million shuffle. So, and that is, as you said, out of money that could have gone somewhere else. Speaking of somewhere else, I think it's time for us to move on to a deal that I think all of us liked a little bit better. Probably would like it pretty well in a vacuum, but you couple it with the Lance Lynn signing and you start filling up the rotation with guys that are just sort of, okay-ish. And that's Kyle Gibson, who I would guess most on the side and most of our readers are not as familiar with Kyle Gibson as they are Lance Lynn, seeing as Lance Lynn was drafted and developed and came up as a starter with the Cardinals during one of the best eras of Cardinals baseball in recent history. And all Kyle Gibson did was play baseball at Mizzou and grew up in Indiana. So he's got some history in the area. And Mo was not shy about indicating that was a factor in his returning home. And so Kyle Gibson is here, and he's been a fairly decent start. He's got 20.7 career WAR. If you would have asked me what his career WAR was today, I would not have guessed that it was over 20, but it is. He's got multiple 2.5 WAR seasons in his past. His high is 3.1 last year in 192 innings, which is a rare number of innings these days. For Baltimore, Gibson produced 2.6 WAR with let's just say the FIP because it's so much more optimistic, with a 4.13 FIP to go along with a 4.73 ERA. It's odd that we have a couple starters here whose ERAs and FIPs are so flipped, and I do wonder if that factored into the Cardinals' thinking at all. But Kyle Gibson, any reactions to this guy from either of you? Any of you looked at his stats very deeply? I've got some things that I'll share in a minute, but I thought I'd open the floor to you guys first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Kyle Gibson signing was, you mentioned it, like it was fine in a vacuum.
Yeah.
But I'm not really a huge fan of the pairing with Lance Lynn. And in fact, in the Lance Lynn article that I literally wrote for this morning, I mentioned that there's no way Lance Lynn is the second best starter this team brings in. So as long as they bring in 2 starters that are like actually good ahead of him, then I'll be content. And they brought in, I guess Kyle Gibson is better than Lance Lynn.
I would say, yeah.
If you're going to have a Lance Lynn signing, I feel like you need to bring in pitchers that are significantly better. So I would much rather Gibson have been the Lance Lynn signing with more upside coming in the other way. And then I'm fine with it. But now I feel like the rotation's almost too bottom heavy. And even if they go out and they have the money to go get a top guy, be it Glasnow, Yamamoto, whatever, whoever, fill in the blank, it's still going to be a big drop off, and then like a 3-4 guy and a bunch of 4s and 5s after that. So it's just not the ideal rotation.
Yeah. Adam?
Yeah, no, for me, like I think you said it best, is that if Yamamoto, if Gibson was the Lance Lynn signing and was the depth guy that they were kind of not the depth guy, but I guess the insurance policy in case Steven Matz goes down, or he would fill in that fourth or the fifth spot. But to be spending as much as they already have, when they spend on Lance Lynn, and then to continue spending another $12 million on Kyle Gibson, that raises red flags as to are they going to be having enough money to go drop on $25 million or more on a Snell or Yamamoto, or maybe even a $20 million on a Marcus Stroman, or someone else, probably who is as a better chance of being, the 2 or 3 guy in the rotation and, taking advantage, taking those reins and running with it. Because, if Miles Michaelis is your ace opening day, followed by Kyle Gibson, followed by Lance Lynn, followed by Steven Matz, followed by, your aggregate of guys that I've talked about, that's not a good thing, right? We're going to be, if I just really hope that, with the remaining budget that we had, that the Cardinals have, and, JP, you mentioned it's around 25 to $30 million. I'm hoping, at this point, I think you kind of have to go all in on the ace. And, even if it means you can't really attack the bullpen as well, I think you kind of bite the bullet at the beginning of the year and see how it works out. And, because you really, really do have to make sure that you're getting quality innings instead of just guys who are going to go out there and, kind of just be the Chad innings eaters instead of kind of going out there and, getting strikeouts and whiffs at a high rate. So they still haven't gotten that high strikeout guy. There's still guys out there with Snell and Yamamoto to a degree, but so far shaky. But, and Mo said in his presser that, he emphasized that they're not done, and he made that clear. So hopefully we can take him at his word, and that there's going to be a larger domino to fall in the favor of the Cardinals.
Yeah. Let's take that motif you just mentioned, because I think this is very relevant in understanding who Kyle Gibson is. I'm sure a lot of you didn't watch Baltimore pitching or Minnesota pitching before that. So who is Kyle Gibson? Well, Mo talked about wanting or needing the necessity of changing their organizational philosophy when it comes to developing and acquiring pitching. And the key words there that either he used multiple times or the media latched onto, sometimes it's either or both of those things, is swing and miss, swing and miss, swing and miss. Now, we on the site, we interpret that as K percentage and whiff percentage, which is basically our key metrics for measuring those things. By the way, do not use, I love you all, guys, everyone out there, do not use K per 9. Okay. Like, I know it's on the Fangraphs dashboard, and I would pay Fangraphs money to remove it from their dashboard, and it's super easy just to find it. But K per 9, especially like Lance Lynn, is a case study in why K per 9 should not be used. K per 9, all it tells you is the number of strikeouts that a pitcher has relative to 9 innings pitched. Well, if they can't get guys out in any other way, then a lot of their K per 9s are going to be higher, but their K rate could still be really low. And Lynn's is not super low, but I've heard several times today about how Lynn is a strikeout guy because he has nearly a strikeout per inning pitch. Well, his K percentage is like 23%. Doing this off the top of my head, so if I'm wrong, I apologize. Like 23%, which is probably right at league average. Okay, his K per 9 looks like it's been improving like this year over last year. That's just because he had a lot more base runners, a lot more guys on base, and his innings went a lot farther, and it didn't get out guys other ways. So it was basically all Ks or nothing. But overall, his K rate fell, and so K percentage, not K per 9, you'll be happier in life. And I just want you to be happy in life, friends. That's all I want. I just want you to be happy in life. Speaking of happy in life, all Kyle Gibson does is not strike out guys, despite a new sweeper, looks really good, and not make guys whiff, although he's not terrible at whiffs, not great at Ks, not terrible at whiffs, about average in whiffs, about 23 percentile in K rate. I do have these. He doesn't walk anyone, and he gives up a ton of ground balls. Kyle Gibson is essentially Miles Mikolas for all intents and purposes. A pretty poor fastball, pretty good breaking pitch. Now, Miles is an off-speed pitch, if I remember correctly, but he is exactly the kind of pitcher that the Cardinals have targeted. He does not in any way fit the new pitch to swing and miss stuff kind of guy that they said they were targeting. And he's just another one of those kind of guys, which doesn't make him a bad pitcher. It just makes him a very comfortable pitcher for the Cardinals, and one that plays well in Busch Stadium, that doesn't give up a lot of home runs and should play good with a good defense, but yet to be determined whether the Cardinals have a good infield and outfield defense. So there's Kyle Gibson.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, like, you're right about the swing and miss. I came in actually expecting the Cardinals to sign pitchers that strike people out, and they just really haven't.
No,
but that doesn't make me down on Gibson at all. At least, like, yeah, and I know you mentioned it, and like Gibson at least feels like the guy who ages very well.
Yeah,
because he has multiple plans of attacks for hitters. He gives them different looks. He throws like 6 different pitches and doesn't do any of them more than like 30% of the time. His velocity's dropped a little bit, but it stayed the same from last year, and he was still effective after it dropped. Like, it feels like he can still maintain that solid back end production. It's just going to be a really boring, bland, takes the ball every day, puts up like 2 WAR maybe, and that's the season.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that I would say it, to borrow from our friends Ben and Ben over at Cardinals Off Day, former VEB writers, they talked about Steven Matz being like Dr. Thunder to Marcus Stroman's Dr. Pepper. Well, what's lower than Dr. Thunder? Like that's where we are with with Kyle Gibson, because even Matz gets swing and miss a little bit, and Gibson just really doesn't. So now I want to know what would be lower than Dr. Thunder. Like, is there Sam's Choice Dr. Pepper, something like that you can get?
Gotta
Like
be.
his version of Dr.
They have
Pepper.
best cola. They have best cola at Deerbrooks, don't they?
Best is, I don't know. Best is pretty awesome. I'm not sure that Kyle Gibson is awesome enough to be best. So all right. So yeah, I mean, I guess, at 12 million versus 10 million, Gibson, I think that we can be a little bit optimistic about Kyle Gibson. 2.6 WAR is hard to ignore. I mean, that's not a bad WAR total. I don't think that I had very many number 3 starters in my master plan list that really were looking at a 2.6 WAR or better projection. And so, if that being the case, as the number whatever he is starter, not too bad. Now, my problem with it is that if I'm going to push Miles Mikolas down pretty low, because I think Mikolas is on the downside of his career, and he's sliding down fairly rapidly, then Kyle Gibson could be your number 2, and that worked for Baltimore last year, but not really what I want for the Cardinals this year.
Yeah, it's not. And I actually think it's kind of interesting that there's only a $2 million difference between Lynn and Gibson, because in terms of production and security, I would value Gibson much higher, but I guess 10 million is what it takes to get to the starting pitching table. So
Yeah,
they probably had to overpay a bit for Lynn if they
they might
wanted.
have. Yeah, it seems like 10 million is just like a baseline for someone who has a name that's once good. Yeah. So
I almost feel like now that they've committed $22 million to these two guys, it almost feels like, if they still want to address the bullpen simultaneously, maybe make other miscellaneous signings, maybe to address the bench at some point. I don't know. I think they're probably going to be acquiring their top end guy via trade, just because I feel like, they're still going to be spending maybe $5 to $10 million on your bullpen. That kind of leaves you short on the free agency pitching market for the top tier guys, maybe a few $1,000,000. And, like I said earlier, DeWitt could approve of that extra spending, if it's only a little bit. But I think if he has a concrete budget, which that is kind of his history, I feel since the Cardinals have been somewhat reluctant to spend, I would feel that DeWitt is more of a guy who is more economical. I think that Mozeliak and his team are probably going to be, forced to maybe trade for a guy like a Dylan Cease or a Logan Gilbert of the type, or maybe someone else. But I just feel like this kind of pushes the needle a little bit more to maybe making a trade instead of I think if I had to take a guess, I think they're probably done with the free agency market looking for big guys. And I think that doesn't mean the big guy isn't going to come. I just think that's going to happen via trade instead of the free agency market. I think that's just a little bit more likely at this point.
yeah, it's just, I mean, we've all said it from day one that we feel like there's got to be a trade in here, both because of the finances of the situation. You trade for a pitcher, they're going to be cheaper, generally speaking, and the situation on the 40-man roster and the 26-man roster, they still got Carlson, they still got O'Neill, they still got Burleson. They've got to find a place for Edman to play. They got to find a place for Donovan to play. It's just begging for a trade of some kind. Now, I personally would prefer to keep as many of those pieces as we can, but I don't really have any problem with trading one of them, like trading O'Neill. You still got to find outfield. Trading Donovan, you've still got Edman, you still got Gorman, you've still got fine options on the infield. It's just a matter of picking and choosing which one of those would give you the best return. But I think there's some question there. In fact, we'll jump back to the budget here in a minute. Let's just go ahead and talk about what we see next. And I thought one of the interesting things that happened at the non-tender deadline was that the Mariners traded for, let's see if I can come up with the name, because I hadn't even thought about this. Was it Luis Urias?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a weak hitting middle infield, shortstop, second base kind of option with basically 2.5 WAR history, had a down year last year. Basically, and not exactly the same kind of player, but very similar to Brendan Donovan as a player type. Walks quite a bit, doesn't have a ton of power, but but fits that mold. And so when that came down, I mean, it's not going to necessarily stop them, but it did kind of indicate to me that Seattle's interest in someone like Brendan Donovan would be a lot lower than it would have been before. They like that kind of player more than they like pure power hitting types. And so Donovan looked like a really attractive option to the Mariners. Well, that might not be the case anymore. They've got a Donovan. So, you'd start taking some of the Mariners pitchers out of it, then that stops being as attractive of an option. The White Sox, meanwhile, said basically they're open for business. And that's, as I said on Twitter or the site or somewhere, that's like ringing the dinner bell for Mo. He's like, are you open for business? I want your best players. And so you could consider Luis Robert in that. I don't think that's very likely considering the outfield situation, but if they're trading players, I'd take them. And then circling back around to Dylan Cease, but Dylan Cease, I still think is going to require more than what the Cardinals want to give up. And yeah, you would get a nice under team control younger starter to lock in there for 2 years. But I think it would start now that you can't trade Herrera because you got rid of Kisner, a move I supported, but it takes Herrera off the table. You're looking at Kisner. I'm sorry, not looking at Kisner. You're looking at Gorman or bust probably in a trade for Cease. And I just don't really think that's what the Cardinals should do.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, I don't think that takes them off of the pitching market, like for a guy like Dylan Cease, obviously because they need it. And we mentioned this before. If that means trading a guy like Mason Wynn, I wouldn't be opposed to that, just because Mason Wynn for now is the Cardinals shortstop of the future, right? For at least for the next 4 to 5 years, considering all things hold constant. Even if he's a league average bat, he's still going to be a good enough defender and a good enough base runner to probably be at least a 2-WAR shortstop. I just think that they could do better, trying to do something differently, with internal development or maybe making a free agent signing maybe in the year past or in the future. But I think as it is now, we kind of have to focus on looking, if you're going to be acquiring an ace, and if you use a guy like Dylan Cease, or you're trying to get a guy like Dylan Cease, you want to keep guys who who are already providing a lot of value in the major leagues. So if you got Brendan Donovan, if you've got Nolan Gorman, who are potential, all-stars down the road, I think that makes it begs the question, if you look at a guy like Tommy Edman or Dylan Carlson or a Tyler O'Neill, that would be probably more optimal trade shifts, just because they're towards the end of, their team control years. And aside from Tyler O'Neill, and maybe, obviously Tommy Edman was really good as a utility guy. He's not the offensive force you're really looking for. And if it means getting a guy at the top of the rotation, like you have needed for a couple of years now, I would pull the trigger. And even if with Mason Wynn, I just think that you can probably find the value elsewhere. You can, swivel guys around and figure it out some way. I like the bat of Brendan Donovan and Nolan Gorman so much, the fact where I'm okay, trading Mason Wynn away, just because you value that offensive production so much more.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. And this is actually where I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Cardinals do next. Because as of now, they've had a really risk-averse offseason. But if they want to get a top pitcher, they're going to have to assume some kind of risk. So is that risk going to be financial, or is it going to be in the terms of players? Because that's going to determine if they go for a guy like a Blake Snell, Sonny Gray, or Yamamoto, or if they're going to try to trade for a Dylan Cease, a Tyler Glasnow, et cetera. I was a little hesitant about Glasnow at first because of the injury issues. But if the Cardinals are going to go out and get like 360 innings of back-end starters, I'm a little more open to the idea of training for Glasnow now.
Exactly.
Glasnow gets hurt, you're
100%.
not going to completely fall apart, even if you lose all of your upside.
Yeah.
And Glasnow probably doesn't take a whole lot. Like, we're probably not talking about Mason Wynn, Brendan Donovan, Nolan Gorman to trade for Glasnow. It's probably more of a Dylan Carlson, Alec Burleson, Tyler O'Neill. Those players all have varying degrees of interest, I'm sure. But that is something that feels like it's almost the right blend of risk for the Cardinals, because they're not assuming that much financial risk or risk in terms of trading young players. I just don't think they're going to do it if they're placing such a premium on injuries. So I would
on injuries
on innings on
innings. Okay.
Yeah.
See, because the way that I was thinking about it this afternoon, I agree with you, but if you're concerned about taking a risk in one area, right? What do? You shore up that area in another way. And so if you're concerned about, if you ignore the qualifying offer for a second, you take Blake Snell out of the table, right? Like, because Snell would have the same type of issue, but he would have that qualifying offer attached. If you ignore that for a second, then you start looking at Glasnow as a legit ace who could put things together and finally be healthy and finally be productive. But you've got to mitigate the innings. Well, the Cardinals did that. They mitigated the innings concern. They've got that in spades. That's basically all they have. They don't have production, but they've got innings, right? So get that production. Go and get that Glasnow and trade from your middle tier of trade options, so you don't have to get up into your real talent. Like you said, I would do a Carl in this scenario. I hate to do a lot of years for 1 year, but I'd do Carlson or Glasnow. And I think that's just an overpay from our side of things, considering Glasnow's actual value and actual production and actual projections versus his ceiling, which he's never hit, right? So, I would do a Carlson for Glasnow just to clean the roster up and make things sort of right and have that ace there, with the hope that Glasnow proved healthy and I could re-sign him for 4 or 5 years. Now it'd be a risky re-signing, but the problem Glasnow offers is the one that they've mitigated, which makes me think that that's the way they're leaning. Except I still think they're going to try everything they can do to get Yamamoto first.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. And it's interesting. Mo put a lot of emphasis on trying to cover 162 games in 187 days or whatever his quote was, and
That exactly,
about
yeah.
having innings in hand and whatnot. So I'm curious to see now if that only applies to the 2 signings that they've already made, or if that is a general rule going forward.
Yeah.
Because that really is what we need to know.
Yeah, because otherwise it's gray. If that's what their concern is, then their choice is gray, and that's about it. Which is, I think it's not that Gray is a bad pitcher, but considering who you got, signing Gray now doesn't make any sense at all.
No, Gray actually, I think of all the pitchers that they could get, makes the least sense now.
Yeah.
Like, because he's not the high end guy that they could be targeting, so he doesn't give them that ceiling. But then he also costs a draft pick for the future if the Cardinals are wanting to plan for it. Like, if we're gonna, that feels like the worst move that they could make right now.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So the other option here, I mean, depending on Glasnow, like Mo did say that he wasn't looking that hard at trades. I don't really believe him when he said that, but he did. I mean, who knows? It's still early in the offseason, and they've been focused on the free agent market and Yamamoto. So maybe he just literally means right now we haven't been focused on the trades because we signed these 2 other arms. So I still think that some of these moves, these roster cleanup moves, like O'Neill, Burleson, probably that's as far down as I'd go. There's other guys down in the minors that I could mention. But I still think that they're interested in improving this bullpen too. And some roster cleanup moves to acquire some quality bullpen pieces make a lot of sense. I think it's underselling. It definitely been underselling something like Carlson. It's probably about what you could expect from O'Neill. But I could see at this point, for example, I could see the Cardinals using O'Neill to acquire a bullpen piece or 2, rather than them using O'Neill to acquire Alek Manoah, for example, which is a player that they've talked about. Someone like Alek Manoah, in my opinion, at this point, doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah, he doesn't. And if the Cardinals are going to trade for Manoah, I mean, I feel like his floor is like Lance Lynn.
Yeah.
It's probably lower than that because he was actually terrible last year. But like, if they want to try to find that back end, maybe swing guy, they could have traded for Manoah, and he would also be on a super cheap contract, which would have freed up money to spend elsewhere. So I feel like the Lynn signing almost takes them out of the Manoah race. Doesn't really make a lot of sense now.
Yeah, I put a lot of balance there too, and I also wonder what the Blue Jays were demanding, because the last couple trade, I mean, they did make a trade with the Blue Jays at the deadline, but in the winter they were looking at Danny Jansen and at least another one of their catchers there in Toronto, and the demands they felt like were crazy high. So I'm wondering again if Toronto isn't making really high demands for one of their pitchers, and Mo's just like, no, not gonna deal that with you.
Yeah, well, they probably are, because they're not going to want to sell low on a guy who was a Cy Young candidate.
No, why should they? Why should they?
Why should they? So, and no team is going to assume a pitcher like Manoah, who has so much risk, for the price that the Blue Jays want to pay. So it just doesn't even seem likely that he's even going to get traded, regardless of whether or not that.
We can sit here and say that Manoah for O'Neill is a good deal, and Toronto could be like, I don't care if it's a good deal or not. I want Carlson, or I want Herrera, or I want Gorman. That's it. That's happened to the Cardinals before, and it might be happening again, which is a good thing. I really didn't want Manoah anyway, so I don't really care.
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to maybe acquiring an Alek Manoah if it was, if you're still trying to acquire a guy who can still have, number 2 or 3 ace starter, or number 2 or 3 starter potential, and he still got team control. And, he did show that, even though he got shelled in that FCL stint when he got sent back down, he still rebounded to a degree, and he was, I think he can still come back and at least be not a shell of himself, but if he's still a 3 guy, that's still not bad if he's a 3 WAR pitcher over the course of the next couple of years, and especially if he's cost controlled. maybe you don't get your number, your 4 or 5 WAR pitcher, but if you're getting 3 WAR for, giving up Dylan Carlson, who's not going to be playing, hopefully, I wouldn't play Dylan Carlson 4 or 500 PAs next year, given how bad he is against right-handed pitching. That allows you maybe to keep a Tyler O'Neill. And if Carlson ends up being the guy traded for a guy like Manoah, you're taking a little bit of a risk, and then, you still have money to spend, and you still get another guy who potentially could be, a 2 or 3 guy, if all goes to plan. But like Blake mentioned, that isn't probably if I'm the GM of the Blue Jays, if it's Alex Arthanopoulos, I don't forget his name is, but if I'm him, I'm probably not making that deal just because I'm not allowing a team to buy low on a guy like Alek Manoah, and then only for him to become an all-star again next year with some other team because they clean up his command issues. So if it comes to something like that, I wouldn't be opposed to getting a guy like Alek Manoah. I just think that whatever resources you have now, you got to be very, very careful with how you spend them, and you have to get value per inning instead of just playing the long game and saying, okay, he's going to produce a little bit of value over the course of an inning, over the course of a long set. So fingers crossed they make that swing and miss guy happen over the next couple of weeks, or before the season starts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to continue the trade conversation, like if I'm the Cardinals right now, I'm calling the White Sox and the Rays about Glasnow and Cease. Those are my top 2 options in the trade market for a top starter. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think I would agree. There might be someone else out there, but from what I've seen of the market, it's, and I think we kind of all in agreement. It's we're going to hang in on Yamamoto as long as we can. If the White Sox or the Rays start putting some sort of deadline on their deals around or just after the winter meetings, I'm probably going to jump at one of those. For Glasnow or Cease, I would probably go the order that I'd want them would be Yamamoto, Glasnow, Cease is probably my 3, just because of the demands that Cease would have and the contract demands and the risk of Yamamoto. The innings, they all have flaws in acquiring them. They're not perfect acquisitions, but that's the rate that I would go. And I'd probably put the best odds on Glasnow right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's also interesting to factor in the teams that the Cardinals would be trading with, because the Rays obviously are a really smart team. So I'd be curious to see what they're asking versus the White Sox, who I question the direction that they're taking.
Yeah.
So I mean, trading for a guy like Cease who has control probably means they're going to be asking for somebody good, but there's still, I would rather deal with the White Sox in a vacuum than with the Rays. It's just the players that we're talking about now that really value hedges on.
Yeah, because with the White Sox, you might be able to do bulk, which the Cardinals prefer. You might be able to give up like Carlson, for example, an expendable piece to some extent, and then 2 or 3, minor league pieces that might have some upside. I'm not going to necessarily name names, but someone under Roby, someone under Hintz, maybe go Jerpy, Graceffo, and Urias or something. Not Urias. What's the Prieto? Something like that. There's probably some other guy, Pajes or not Pajes, Crooks, someone like that. To kind of fill it out a little bit and make it work. So I think that would be a possibility with them. Whereas I think that the Rays are going to ask for whatever player it is that John Mozeliak loves the most, and then demand that from him until he screams in pain and gives up. So that's what the Rays do.
Just I guess if there wasn't anything else regarding these other 2 pitchers, if we're still on the trade discussion,
yeah, go ahead.
How do we feel about the Cardinals' chances acquiring another hitter for the lineup, if at all? Juan Soto is still in the trade market, and obviously we're hearing a lot of Yankees, big market teams, but the Cardinals do have the prospect capital to do it. Do we see a guy like Juan Soto potentially, being handed $400 million plus by the Cardinals, or what do you guys think about that? Still, maybe the Cardinals addressing the hitting market overall with anything that they have to spend. What do you guys think on that?
I would say probably not on Juan Soto, just because of the money that would have to go to him when they're still trying to fill out the rotation.
Yeah.
The hitting market, I mean, I guess it depends on who the Cardinals, if they make a big trade. I think really the hitting market's going to come down to if they make a big trade, who is it going to be? And then do they want to backfill for who they traded away? But I don't think they're actually going to go out and make a move to try to improve their starting lineup at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think the money's there with the trade demands. Like, say, for example, the only way that would work for a Juan Soto deal is if they ignored their number 1 starter, which I don't see them doing, or they made a move for Cease, because Cease cheaper. So you could do Cease, it would be cheaper, but then you'd have to give up a lot of talent, and then you'd have to trade for Juan Soto. Then you have to pay him a lot of money. So that would be tough. I don't see how the math works on that. But we also know they've been interested in the past. So, that you can't ignore that either. I I don't hear any buzz about that other than fans talking about it. So it makes me wonder if there's, just fans talking. So last thing I want to do before we get out of here, we probably should have done it before we talked trade details, but that was more interesting. So I have run the numbers. I've got the new budget stuff. I'll probably put this on the site on Saturday, so I can get a quick article out and get back to eating day old turkey. So our budget right now, the Cardinals are at 162 million, a little less than that. 161.97 million is their budget commitments right now. After I took out the non-tenders and added in a couple extra minor league minimums to make a 13-13 offense and pitching roster. 21.7 millions in arbitration eligible salaries. And that is Edmund, O'Neill, Helsley, Carlson, Romero, and King. As you guys know, I was in favor of non-tendering King. I don't really care that they kept him. It's just 1 million. They did Woodford as long as one of those went, because it is just about millions. So where they are right now with Lynn in there at 10 million and Gibson at 12 million, not counting the performance bonuses for Lynn's, the Cardinals are at 162. I'm estimating a 192 budget. So the math there is really easy. They've got about 30 million more to spend. If you assume, which we kind of have, if you assume that O'Neill is traded, you can't assume that they'll get rid of all of his salary or not take salary back. But if you want to cut that out to, you're at about 35 to 36 million as the high end of where the Cardinals are right now, which is more than enough to sign any pitcher on the market right now, including Yamamoto, and leaves them enough flexibility to bring in at least one bullpen arm more if they tried to do a trade, which, as we said, would be our preferred way to go. So 162 is where they are. 192 is where I'm projecting. I feel pretty good about my projection. Feel really good about that. I think that that's a good number considering the moves they've made, the money they spent, and what they're targeting still. And so, yeah, go out there this week while you're talking with your grandpa and your uncle over turkey and spend $30 million of the Cardinals budget your way and see if you don't match us. You're going to end up with Glasnow. So that's the logical conclusion. Blake.
Yeah, I actually love that you track the payroll because it really helps me understand what the Cardinals might do next. And when I look at how much money they have to spend and what the gaping hole is on the roster right now, it's very clear.
It's very clear, isn't it? Yeah.
They should be putting somewhere between $20 to $30 million in average annual value to a top of the line starting pitcher.
Yeah.
Which actually
and guess who's going to make somewhere between 25 or 20 and 30
Yamamoto.
million? Tyler, the Yamamoto and Tyler Glasnow, 25 million. Yeah.
And the Cardinals have put a lot of time, effort, and money into increasing their Japanese presence. They've put a scout full-time designated to scout the NPB, the scout prospects over there. I wouldn't be shocked if the Cardinals are heavily involved in the Yamamoto market. I also think now Glasnow makes sense. And when I look at this, I actually think Dylan Cease doesn't make sense. Nothing I would even not from a talent perspective, but when we look at the money, his arbitration projection is like $8 or $9 million.
Yeah.
I feel like if the Cardinals really wanted to get Cease, then they wouldn't have gone and signed two back-end starters to take up $22 million. That's
a good point.
Yeah, that's a good point because they'd end up 20 million. Yeah, they would end up 20 million under budget and 10 million less than last year, unless they invested in a crazy reliever, which they're not going to do. And that would, the optics of that would just be really bad. The Cardinals they wouldn't have needed to do it.
Because you could literally they could have just, the first two signings just don't make sense if they go to Cease. You could have gotten Cease and then gotten Yamamoto for close-ish to making the money work.
Yeah.
So I don't think Cease really now is actually going to be what happens. So I think it's really down to Glasnow and Yamamoto. And that's me hoping that they go for guys of that caliber and not guys lower than that.
And maybe Snell. Snell fits too a little bit, but there's the qualifying offer. There's, the years.
I think Snell is just too much risk for the Cardinals. Between the innings limitations, the injury history, control issues, the money, the qualifying offer. I just think that's too much risk for the Cardinals to take on.
I agree. The only reason why I disagree is that Gould keeps bringing him up. So, and Gould kept mentioning Kyle Gibson too. So there's a reason, but he didn't mention Lance Lynn. I will say that. Gould doesn't know everything. He knows more than I do, but he didn't know everything. Sometimes I don't think the Cardinals knew everything they're going to do. So how can Gould know? But yeah, Snell I think is still in the picture. But I think Gould's point probably has just been they're going to sign someone in that class, and here are the guys that they're considering, and they're all the ones that we've been mentioning because of the something resembling logic that they make sense. So
yeah, and if the Cardinals do end up going that route, then this offseason looks a lot better. It's still just not great because what I would depending on what the White Sox want for Cease, again, like I'd rather put the 8 to 9 million towards Cease than the 10 million towards Lynn. But at least they're getting somebody that gives some kind of ceiling to the rotation.
Yeah. Adam, any final thoughts before I've got a really optimistic thing I want to tell everyone before we go out, but Adam, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I just think that was a really good point that Blake made in saying that, and you can kind of mentally narrow it down to kind of Yamamoto and maybe a Snell or like a Dylan Cease. But even like when you said like Dylan Cease kind of being out of the market just simply because that, if he's already making less, they probably would have already splurged instead of kind of spending, the foundation money on guys, who are going to solidify the rotation on the back end, like Lynn and the Kyle Gibson. So, I think that, if this means that they're going all in on the Yamamoto, that I think you kind of painted a clear picture that I feel like, like you mentioned, where, they've got the scouts there. You see Newt Barr doing as much recruiting as as he can. You've seen a lot of, you see Yamamoto, just have some sort of a, soft spot, at least for St. Louis. And I do believe that, I really hope at least that this is going to be the guy that they're going to get, just because they need to get that top end guy. And, if they can get the best pitcher on the market, even if they don't, if they get a Snell or, even if it's a Marcus Stroman at this point, I think, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But like I said, I feel like it's probably going to I feel like at this point it's probably going to be, Yamamoto or bust. I think if, like if they don't spend the money, like they said, like I feel like they probably could swing that trade. And the White Sox, like you mentioned, are a team that they're going to be okay having a larger prospect package instead of a 1-for-1 guy or a specific guy that they want to get. So, yeah, I think just kind of solidifying those points overall, it's got to be ace or bust at this point.
Yeah. So that's what I want to leave you with. As you are traveling today or tomorrow, heading to grandma's house, heading up the road, whatever you're doing, you're going to put on the VEB podcast and you're going to be like, guys, give me good news. And you're going to suffer through 40 minutes of us talking about Lance Lynn. And you're going to be like, no, I asked for good news. And then you're going to get to the end and you're going to hear all three of us independently say everything the Cardinals have done indicates that they are pushing all in towards Yamamoto. And that's what you all wanted this offseason. I mean, I've read the site. I know that's what all you all wanted. I can't say I ever thought it was a possibility, but my optimism about a Yamamoto signing is higher now than it's been at any point in the offseason. It's the move that makes the most sense with what they've done. Can't promise you it's going to lead them to contention. Can't promise you that Yamamoto is going to be a number one superstar ace in year one. He probably won't, but you can't even promise that they're going to sign him, but it sure looks like they're going to try. And that's something to, be happy about as you head to your Thanksgiving dinner. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Be safe on your travels. Hopefully the Cardinals won't do anything else between now and the end of the weekend, because we're tired of doing these articles and talking about it. But from Blake and from Adam and from everyone else out there in VEB land, thanks for listening to us. Have a very happy Thanksgiving. And we'll see Yamamoto under our trees for Christmas, we hope. Have a great weekend. VEB, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.